Hello everyone, and welcome back. This is the first video in my what if series, and what my what if series is going to be is taking the modern conveniences that we have today, the things that spoil us so much, and taking them away and trying to bring back some of these old school methods back to life and implementing them back into my homestead. So for this first video, what if I no longer had a dehydrator? I'm going to be dehydrating some herbs today, but I'm not going to be using my dehydrator. I'm going to be salt curing them. This is an easy video, I guess you can say, just because there are so many different ways that you can dry herbs. If you don't have a dehydrator, you can use an oven. That is super common and something that people still use today. You don't have to have a dehydrator. There are certain herbs that you should not put in an oven to dry, just because like things that are super high, like with their water content, will tend to mold faster in an oven with how long it takes to dehydrate them before you can actually get all the moisture out, and it will also degrade the flavor. Things like dill, cilantro, basil, those kinds of things they don't recommend you putting in the oven. You can also air dry them. That is a super common method and something that's been used for hundreds of years. That is just basically tying up your herbs by the stems in small bundles. Airflow is key. No matter what you're dehydrating, you want to make sure you're getting good airflow so everything is getting dehydrated evenly. We're trying to pull the moisture out of these herbs so that they can be preserved longer and we can keep using them for an extended period of time. Now, that is a very common method in homesteads, and like I said, it's been used for hundreds of years, and it also just kind of gives you like a nice, like, homey, almost witchy feel. And I do occasionally do that, but today we are going to be salt curing. This is something that I'm going to try implementing a little bit more on my homestead, and I'm going to show you guys today how to do it. This has been used for hundreds and hundreds of years, and pretty much how this works is you layer your herbs in a sealable jar. For instance, I probably wouldn't recommend plastic. I feel like that wouldn't exactly seal appropriately because you're trying to make sure that it's airtight, right? So I would use a jar if you can, and you're going to layer the salt and the herbs and make sure that the herbs are covered with the salt appropriately, and you're going to layer it, and then you leave it for a few weeks. And what the salt does is it pulls the moisture out and it makes it so mold and can't grow. You're drying the herbs out, and it will actually preserve the flavor. A lot of people do this, and that's what we're going to do today. But before we get started, I want to talk about salt, because the salt that you use does matter. You don't want to use table salt, like your basic salt that has iodine, and this also has caking agents in it, and this will mess with the preservation. So do not use this. What you can use is sea salt, pink Himalayan salt. You can even use like your canning salt if you have this laying around, but just beware that this will be, it'll be super salty. What I'm going to be using today is this pink sea salt, and I already have my jars out, and my herbs of choice today are going to be rosemary and basil. That is what I have a lot of right now, and that is what I need preserved for later. And so that's what we're going to do. Let's get started. Let me move you a little bit so you can see what I'm doing here. So let's go ahead and do the rosemary first. I feel like that's going to be the easiest. I'm going to get a cup just so I can measure it out, scoop it out. So first you want to make sure that you cover the bottom of your container with enough, make sure it's clean. You want to make sure you cover the bottom of your container with enough salt that it creates a decent little layer right there, okay? You want to make sure that your herbs aren't going to be touching the jar just on the bottom. Okay. We are going to call that good. It's all the way across. So what you want to do with your herbs is you're going to put them in a single layer. It's okay if they touch a little bit, but you don't want them to be overlapping. And I feel like with the rosemary, it's going to be hard to make sure that it doesn't overlap. It's such a small herb. So when I say you don't want them to overlap, I'm talking about more like these basil leaves that we'll get to here in a moment. It'll be okay if the edges slightly overlap, but you don't want them stacked on top of each other because they will not dry right, and it'll keep moisture trapped in between the leaves. And then obviously your whole preservation hack is like mute, like, because it's not going to work right. Okay, and now we're gonna add more salt. Now it doesn't have to be super, super thick. You just want to do your best to cover as much as you can, and then you're going to keep layering it over and over like that until your jar is filled. Now, the best thing about this is that when you go to pull this out, so like I said, it will be done in like 2 to 3 weeks. When you go to pull it out to add to recipes, you will just simply pull the herbs out of the salt. You can like wipe them off, and then you just crunch them into whatever recipe, or just add them whole into whatever recipe you're using. But the salt itself will get infused with the herbs that you had placed in there, so you can use the salt in these recipes too. Don't just throw it away. And a lot of people will actually make infused salts, and I'm pretty sure the ratio is 1 to 4. If I'm wrong, I'll put it up here on the screen what the correct ratio is, but essentially you would do like a 1/4 cup herb to 1 cup salt. So you want to do a 1 to 4 ratio of your herbs and salt, and you would just, instead of doing it whole like I am now, you would put your herbs in a food processor or excuse me, some kind of grinder to get them chopped up nice and fine, and then you would add them into your salt mixture and just make sure it's evenly distributed, and then you can use that whole thing in your recipe as an infused salt. And that is super common as well. That might be something I try at another time. I do really like, oh, I should have used a wide mouth jar. Good thing I have small hands. I tried my best to get most of these stems off, but there are a couple of them that I missed. Now, when I put them, obviously air drying, the stems don't really matter. And when you're dehydrating in the oven, it's also not too big of a deal, but I'm trying to make sure, because I don't want this to taste woody. And I don't typically put like rosemary sticks in my recipes for that reason, because sometimes depending on when you pick them, it can kind of have like a woody taste, and I don't want that. So I try to make sure it was all taken out. If this is something that you would try on your homestead, let me know in the comments down below. Or if you already have tried this, is this something that you like to do? Like I said, this isn't something I typically do. This is something new for me. I usually just use my dehydrator. It's easy for me. It's just a set it and forget it. I usually have my dehydrator going all season long. And as one thing gets done, something else is going in, or I'm freezing things. I really like to do infused butter, so I will melt down butter and infuse like garlic and herbs into it, and then refreeze it in like butter cubes. And I love that for like a quick simmer, like if I need to, if I'm cooking meats or marinating or rice or whatever, I can just pull out one of those butter cubes, and it adds so much flavor. That's one of my go-tos. So I'm curious to see how this will upgrade some of my recipes. I guess one thing that I didn't already say is obviously when you pick your herbs, you want to make sure you're picking them in when they're in high season. You want to make sure you're picking leaves that aren't already browning, and you obviously want to make sure you wash them and that you wash them and dry them before you attempt to do this. Otherwise, I mean, if they're soaking wet when you're doing this, that obviously isn't going to preserve them right. All your salt's just going to clump up, and there's going to be way too much moisture in your jar for it to preserve appropriately. So we got a nice little layering system going here. It seems like there's a lot of salt, but obviously we need a lot of salt to make sure that we're pulling the moisture out. We're about halfway there. I'm gonna go ahead and finish this off camera, and then I will do the basil next. Also, one more thing that I did not mention, as I'm finishing this up, you want to make sure that you add a nice thick layer to the top, just like we did the bottom. So we want to make sure everything is completely in there and packed down. I didn't really mean to press each individual leaf down as I was doing it. Rosemary leaves just tend to be a little bit denser, but when I get to go do the rosemary, you'll see I'm going to make sure everything's laying nice and flat, so I can make sure that the salt is touching on all surfaces of the leaf. Okay, now that is all done, I'm going to go ahead and seal it up. And there is my rosemary. I will label it, and I'm going to date it. That way I don't forget when I did it, so that way I can go back through and check it. I'll check it probably at the 2-week mark first and see how everything is pulling out. I think it will probably be ready to use at that point, but let's go ahead and do the basil next. So I have a mixture of purple basil and green basil, so if you see different colored leaves coming out of this bowl, that is why. For me, I use them interchangeably in my recipes, so I'm not too worried about mixing them, besides the fact that it will give it a nice little color scheme too in my recipes and in this jar. So let's go ahead and do the same thing. I'm going to add a nice layer of salt on the bottom, and I'm gonna go get a wide mouth jar for this basil, since I'm going to be having to press them down. That'll make it a little bit easier for me to stick my hand in there. Here is my wide mouth jar. That'll make it a little bit easier for me to stick my hand in there. And I've already gone through and picked these off the stems. This will be a little bit more time consuming because, like I said, we want to make sure that we're not overlapping too much. It's okay if they overlap a little bit on the edges, but we can't be having them just stacked on top of each other, or this will not dry correctly. I feel like maybe for the basil, this is going to be kind of time consuming. I feel like maybe it would be beneficial to go through and maybe do that infused salt like I had mentioned. I feel like that would be easier, but I'm already committed, and so we're going to go ahead and finish this out. But next time I will probably do the infused salt instead. Because, I mean, it's getting crunched up anyways in my recipes. The only time I don't crunch up basil leaves is when I'm using it for, like, pickling, or I'm making a tomato sauce, but it all gets mixed in anyway. So we're gonna do the exact same thing as the rosemary. This will just take a little bit more time because of how big the leaves are, and we wanna make sure they are not crazy overlapped. So it'll take me a little bit longer to actually go through and place these leaves instead of just pouring them in like I did with the rosemary. So I will save you guys the headache of watching me just meticulously place these leaves, and we will be back when I'm finished. So what if I couldn't use my dehydrator to preserve my herbs? Well, we still have plenty of options. We can always use the oven, which a lot of people still use today anyways. Just make sure it's on a low heat and you have good airflow, and you can't use it for all herbs, and make sure that you're actually dehydrating them and not cooking them. Then we can always air dry them. That's still really common to use. It's been there for hundreds of years. Make sure you're doing small bundles, good airflow, keep it out of direct sunlight, and it always makes your kitchen look super cute and cozy. And then we have salt curing, which has been around for hundreds if not thousands of years. It does take a lot of salt, but salt is fairly inexpensive. Here is my basil and my rosemary all sealed up and ready to wait. It'll take about 2 weeks and I can start using them. Isn't it so pretty? If you like this kind of content, make sure you subscribe to my channel. This is just the first video in my What If series, and I'm super excited to get started on this one. I have a whole lineup of homestead challenges and old school skills that we are going to be trying out on this What If we didn't have some of these modern conveniences, things that we are just spoiled with today. And if you have any ideas of what ifs that I could add to this series, please let me know in the comments. But I will see you guys in the next one. Thanks for hanging out with me today.